Welcome to Inside the Juno Reactor. People on this podcast will either have had a major impact, a small impact, or absolutely no impact whatsoever on my journey. This week is Zig Gron, a music editor who was with me for 6 months, the time I was in LA for Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. He helped me in so many different situations, learning how to score. He taught me so much, and I hope you gain a lot from his wisdom and these conversations inside the Juno Reactor. Well, hi Zig, nice to see you. Welcome to the first Juno Reactor podcast, and we're going back in time to sort of, reload the past and
resurrect.
And I think there'll be a lot of Matrix fans who'll appreciate your look back at time and how you started. And I mean, I saw that you started in like 93 doing music editing.
Yeah, 93 or 94, but somewhere in there. Yeah.
And so like with the Matrix, you started really early on Matrix 1. And how was that sort of involvement and how did it all come together?
Well, I was working in the spring of that year of 1998. I was working on Lethal Weapon 4 for Dick Donner and Joel Silver. And one of the producers had been going back and forth from Australia where they were shooting this strange movie that there was a little buzz about. And a lot of buzz about, actually, because one of the producers, I remember, came into the mix while we were mixing Lethal Weapon 4 and said, "Oh my God, I just saw Bullet Time." So that was my first, like, what? Bullet Time? And so I'd been in touch with Joel and I said, I'd love to work, on this film. It sounds fantastic. And he said, well, I have no creative control over it. It's completely with the directors. They've written it. It's written so that they have full control. But I'll put in a word for you, he said. I never heard anything. And then suddenly in, I'd say probably September, at the end of the summer, I got a call from Australia, and it was Zach Steinberg. It was the editor. And he told me, I hear you're interested in working on this film. And he said, I'll set up an appointment and I'll let you know. Well, a couple of nights later, we're having a dinner party, and we just finished off probably a bottle of wine each of our guests. And the phone rings, and it's Australia. And Zach's like, "Hi, I got the guys on the phone for you." No previous message or anything. And I just thought, oh my God, this is not the time I want to interview for this job that I really wanted. So I actually confessed. I said, look, if I don't make a lot of sense, it's because I've just been drinking. We have a party here. I wasn't expecting the call. And I think it was Lana, Larry at the time, and said, well, Zig, we've been known to party ourselves a little bit. So we understand. We're fine with that. And so that was it. And that might have actually helped me get the job. I really don't know. But about a couple of days later, they said, yeah, you're hired. We'd like to fly you over to Australia. And I said, great. Can I get there about a week early because of the jet lag and just to get acclimated? And they said, sure. So they were really, really accommodating from the very beginning. It was a real great job to work on. It's one of the few films that I really, really felt very proud to be a part of. I just can't say that about very many other Hollywood films. And I worked on about 60 of them. It was really a great experience from the very beginning. And anyway, so I went down there, and after a week, I sat down, started, and imagine I was seeing The Matrix fresh off the press because the editing room was right next door. So even before, they'd send some stuff over to Dane back in the United States, the sound supervisor. But for music, I was, I believe, one of the first to see it. A lot of the images were already there. And the editing was actually pretty tight. There wasn't a lot of cutting between the first version and the last, which is I'm just setting that up because it's very different from most films that I'd worked on up until that point. And again, I'd probably been only working on films for about 5 or 6 years at that point. So, I ended up being, working about almost 25. So this was really, when I look back, it's sort of the beginning of my career. in a lot of ways. And so there was a lot of growth, I think, that happened. That was really fun.
But when you first saw the Matrix film itself, how did you react to it?
When I first saw the Matrix, back then it was on 20-minute reels, videotape. The original came on videotape, no QuickTime movies. So I think I saw reel 1 and 2. And I mean, come on, that first scene, which they, redid in the fourth one with, from different points of view, of course, but it was, that scene was the first thing I saw. And I was just, every shot just felt like, wow, just knocking me out, my socks off. Just everything I saw was just incredible. And then the daunting thing of like, oh my God, put some music to it.
Don had already been employed, didn't he? And he'd been writing music for it. Why were you brought in? Were you brought in for the contemporary style of
No, actually,
music?
I was brought in for, I think originally just to temp it, just so that we could see how it would play with music, score and orchestra.
And what were you temping it with?
Well, I had a little discussion with Don actually before I left for Austria. He said, what are you thinking about using? And I said, well, I was thinking about sound mass, Ligeti, Penderecki, the usuals, with techno, because this is what the instructions that I got from the Wachowskis. First thing they said to me was, the score hasn't been written, obviously, and we want something really original. We don't want, just like someone to come in and take Q5 from, name your thriller, Hollywood thriller, and put it into our movie. We want there to be something different about it. So immediately I started thinking in terms of the Stanley Kubrick usage of contemporary composers. And that was pretty much in line with what Don was thinking, although he said, I want to do minimalism. I really want it to be a minimalist score. So I did load up on a lot of Philip Glass, Stephen Reich, John Adams, sure.
I mean, Don's like a massive sort of John Adams fan, isn't he?
Yeah. And I think there was some Harmonia, that great piece from John Adams. I think it was in the original. I'm not sure, but I also, the first probably 2 weeks I was in Australia, I just listened to music while they were still, because they had just finished filming. And so they were just beginning the assembly cut when I arrived. And so I just listened to so much techno. And
which ones of the original techno tracks did you bring in that actually got used?
I don't think any of them were, but the places were used. The places that I found to use and switch from the pure orchestra to just techno, or a combination of techno and orchestra, those places were kept. And except for, there was one other techno area I had, but Don ended up doing more of an orchestral approach to it. When they go back into the hotel and they see the cat, this is the Matrix 1, and they see the cat repeated, and the deja vu moment, and that area I had more of a techno feel in there, and it just became orchestra. So I don't know. I didn't make that decision, but I gave them, that's what I was finding as I was doing
which sort of the bands that you were using in Australia that were in your temp score that never got used?
Oh, that's, I wish I could remember. I do know that what I did was I went to Tower Records and I got probably about 100 CDs of every techno that they had in there. And a lot of it, as you well know, it's not very good.
I think a lot of it's not appropriate rather than not being so good, because you can have a track that's amazing on the dance floor, but when you chuck it in a film, it doesn't have the right feeling.
Exactly. And just like the minimalism I was finding on the orchestral end of it was inappropriate as well, because Wachowskis kept saying, we need it to be more gothic, more gothic. They wanted this gothic feel up to the orchestra. And so, you're not going to get gothic from Philip Glass. And most any of those minimalists, I mean, like what Don started with the very beginning with those clarinets and all that was just like, wow, okay. But it was really one of the first films I worked on where the directors had a really, really good idea about what they wanted. They didn't know exactly what it was, but they just kind of knew. They knew
had
what they wanted.
Feeling for their film.
Yeah,
that's always like with the meetings that we had, that were always very particular and very. I thought they were the best. Like, I've had a lot of producers in my life come in to produce records for me, and they were so much better at bringing ideas to the table, putting a thought in your brain, all of these type of things. But moving on from that section from the first film, like, you then said to me once that there was the curse of the Matrix, that like after the Matrix you'd be bombarded with work. And I don't think you worked for like a year or 2 years or something like that.
It was slow going for me. And I was a little bit surprised by that because I hadn't really burned any bridges by that time.
Yeah, that's always a fun side sport, isn't it, to filmmaking?
I hadn't been fired up a film yet. I was pretty clean, as they say. I don't know the reason for it. So what happened was, just to continue on, so Temp, just to get through the basic stuff for anybody that doesn't know why people do temps. Yeah. The reason why you do a temp is, even if the composer's hired and is away writing, by the time they're going to create a soundtrack, they're not going to be able to do it in time that you want to have to screen it for the producers. So you have to have, and the producers, even back then in the 90s, they had to have everything. They wanted sound effects. They wanted the obvious sound effects. They wanted music. They wanted to feel as much like the finished product as it can be. That's what a temp editor can do, because I can obviously, just cut in, even if I'm doing 3 or 4 tracks of rhythm and orchestra and maybe some choir or, something like that. I can do that way faster than someone working, on, every note, doing every note. And we know that there was a lot of notes in there. So, that although Don was so the upshot of it is that Don was so inspired that by the time we got to the first temp, now I'm talking like November, the first temp was in January. By the time we got there, he had written most of the music for all the orchestra parts. And the only thing that was left for my temp this is the first temp screening. The studio heads had already heard it with my soundtrack, and the mixers, people who were going to be working on it eventually, they all heard the temp that I had created. But Don replaced all that stuff already. He was just so, I'd never been, worked on another film like that, where the composer was just like replacing my stuff like faster than almost faster than I was, cutting
I think but Don comes from that sort of TV approach, doesn't he? Where he writes stuff very quickly, or he can do.
He did on this one, and he told me, in fact, because I think I said, "Wow, Don, you're really cranking it out," and he just said, coming from writing a lot of shit. I mean, now I can't stop. I can't put the pen down. So it was good in a way, and so but bad for me because they let me go, and because they said, "Hey, we don't need you anymore. We're going on to the final." Don had his own music editor. And at the time, and so I just said okay, and then I got a call maybe a week or 2 later, just before they were starting the final, and I don't know what happened. I can only speculate, but they asked me. They said, "Hey, those areas that you had the techno in?" I said, "Sure." And well, we want to we want to replace those with some other techno, and we're going to send a music supervisor over to work with you. I said, "Sure, great, sounds good." So Jason came by and had all these ideas, and I went and listened to, he gave me his ideas, and then I listened to stuff, and I said, well, this one is definitely more in the right tempo. I would cut in about 2 or 3 maybe alternates. And then the Wachowskis came over to my house, listened to the takes, the possibilities, and say, yeah, I like that one, which was an ongoing thing that we had. That was part of our relationship, because the techno that I was using in Australia was so crap. I don't think I had any Juno Reactor. I did have Prodigy. They were in the trailer, the original trailer. We used their music.
Okay.
So a lot of the music was just so bad. And I would cut in and then I would create a whole like cue out of this based on this, some kind of, ostinato. And then they would come in and say, "Really, I don't like that. You don't like this," and I would solo the parts, like, "Oh, you don't like this thing," and identify what they didn't like, right? And they'd say, yeah. And so I'd say, "Oh, okay." So, what do you like? And then I would play different, grooves for them. And finally they go, "Oh, we like that." Okay. So I really left it up to them because it's really, music is so subjective. So I left it up to them pretty much. And once I just learned like, okay, hey, going forward, from this one, which kind of a groove do you like for this one? And then they go, "Oh, we like that one." They're great. And then I knew that going in, I had the right sound that they really liked. So that kind of continued into the final because, they were listening to the Jason Bentley version. Now these were the ones that could be licensed for the movie. So we listened to those and then they decided from that. And then they were very particular about how it's cut. Oof. And they were never really satisfied, as it turns out, going on to the second and third one, because, what happened was in the meantime, they really wanted to meld the techno and the orchestra in a way that was unsatisfying, because really Don's score would stop in that first one. Don's score would stop, and then it would come in with what we call a needle drop, right? It's just basically taken a stereo track, taken right off a CD, essentially. And they just never were really, I don't think, happy with that.
This is where the sort of Juno story comes into the Matrix. It's really via you, and where they gave you a bunch of Juno stuff and they asked you to cut it to the Freeway chase.
Well, okay,
yeah. And then I got pulled into LA and they said, do you want to come over for a meeting? And I thought, yeah, great. And they showed me this scene and I was like pretty blown away, as you would be.
Yeah.
But you put those cuts together, didn't you?
Yeah. So that story is, what happened was they shot the second and third movie at the same time. So, and we were in touch, not very much, but a little bit. And what came up was a 10-minute trailer that not many people have seen. It was mixed at Warner Brothers, full on mix, full on sound effects. And it was a long trailer for the producers, specifically for the money people, so that they could see what their money was buying for the last 2 years in Australia, a year and a half at that time. Because they were about halfway through the shoot, maybe. Well, they had already done the freeway chase and they sent me that. And there was a couple of other scenes, but it was really the whole freeway chase was in that trailer. And I cut 3 of your cues in there and they liked it. Also, I know is that they liked it. Actually, Don was going to be writing music for it and he sprained his wrist. He and I were going to work together and he sprained his wrist and he came over to the house and I think he gave me some other outtakes of Matrix cues that he had written that weren't in the album. And he gave me just loaded me up with some other Don music. And I approached that trailer like a temp. And I remember we did the first mix at Dane's with the sound effects and it was like, of course, the sound effects were hound cars and everything, fist fights, and the music was like this, and I was like, it was like 10 of those guys, like all the sound effects guys together, and me, in the room. And I get along really great with Dane, but and we sent it to them, and they got on the phone. Larry and Andy got on the phone, like, Zig, you need to stick up for the music a little more because we can't hear it. I'm like, hey, Dane, talk to Dane about it. He's someone that's pushing the dials.
I had a strange meeting. I was getting my hair cut with a mate of mine in Brighton, like 2 years before I went to the Matrix meeting. And this guy, Nick, said to me, "Oh, I hear you're in the Matrix." And I went, "What?"
Wow.
We're both literally sitting next to each other. He's having his haircut. I'm having mine. I said, "No, I haven't heard anything about that." And then, like, about 2 years later, I mean, God knows how he knew this. 2 years later, I got a call from my manager saying, do you fancy going over and meeting the Wachowskis? And they want to talk to you about the new film. I said, F right, definitely. So he jumped on the plane and went into a meeting with them. And luckily that it was one of those meetings where you're going to get on with these people. Because everything that they liked, the Hitchcock book that I really liked, the Truffaut interview, the poster on the wall of Chinese Ghost Story, everything, it just felt really good. But I remember your Temp score definitely heavily influenced the whole Freeway chase, because when it then came down to me coming over to LA and getting into the Paramore, you were then assigned to me, which was very lucky for me, because I remember sort of saying to you, please teach me everything you know, because I don't know
bugger all about
this. It was very handy. It was really handy, because I know you've worked with a lot of other composers, and sometimes the composer doesn't really want you involved, and other times, in my case, I was really happy for your involvement, because you would say to me, "Oh, you've really got to hit this," because I knew really nothing about any of these things. So you were very instrumental in my ability to progress. And then we sort of very much became a team together, where you were then saying to me things like, "Oh, this taiko scene needs some music." So it felt like a really nice sort of partnership. But I suppose this all leads on, we could go on for hours about that, the workings of the Matrix 2 and Matrix 3 and what was written, and maybe we'll come back to that later.
Don, you still don't want to hear the track, is that correct?
No, I do.
You do want to hear the track, okay? Okay, he does want to hear the track on this one. He does want the track on this one. Armin?
Yes.
He does want to hear the track on this one.
Okay. Brass, please, at 32. A little bit less accent.
Hi, England.
Brighton.
Brighton. Yeah, the news, maybe?
Maybe. Depends what you do next.
Can I just hear that chord, please?
Finger up my...
Because of the introduction of the new film, there's been like a lot of interest in Navras, because I think it's possibly the best thing that I wrote with Don. And it's strange when you think of it like that me and Don are the main writers. We are the writers of that track, but everyone that came into that track rarely had a piece of writing, because it was improvisational. It was, people like Azam would go off because she didn't like being recorded live and everything like this.
Is that right?
So
I don't remember that about her.
Yeah, Azam hated recording.
Azam
So like
Ali.
I think I had Azam, because we were in Michael's studio in LA.
Michael
Kamen's house. So I remember when I was asking Azam to come up with something, I said, let's record something. She was like, oh no, I can't do that. I'm too embarrassed. And so she went off away and came back with ideas, and then we sort of redid it as well. But there was a whole, I remember them saying to me that they wanted 2 minutes. They just wanted 2 minutes of essentially the idea of Don's M piece to be like 2 minutes of for the credits. And then when they heard it, which I think took us like a couple of days of chopping around, they said, okay, give us another 2 minutes. Then the guys said, they loved that. Give us another 2 minutes. Bollocks, just do the whole thing, you know. And I think and I was thinking about this on the way down here, that if the Wachowskis had said to me, do a 9-minute track for the end section, I would have been really frightened at that prospect. But because it all came in like that, I'll do 2 minutes. Oh yeah, great. Do another 2 minutes. And we had it by then.
Yeah.
So it was that whole thing of, then we went back into re-record the orchestras, the choirs. But I think we had such a good energy with all of the people coming down, like Lakshmi Shankar, Deepak Ram, Greg, my kids, and everything, that it had a really spontaneous feel. Mabi, who's no longer here. But I think it was quite a special time, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now maybe you don't remember it this way. I don't remember that. I kind of remember it being a 9-minute piece. Like I'm going to do the whole ending. How I remember it, I could be completely wrong. So I like your version of it, actually. So we'll go with that. But I do remember leading up to this point, all of the music how we had collaborated was usually you starting with a track and then adding Don to it. Now, the Burley Brawl was one where it went back and forth a few times. I don't remember how many times, but not more than 3, but it went back and forth where you would do something and add some other section and then go to Don and he would write something more on top of it. And then then you would come it back. But anyway, my job at that point was to incorporate and help you incorporate a lot of what Don was doing. And then, of course, the Pro Tools was the final sequence, right? Where we would replace all of Don's little synthesizer tracks that you would be, working with, like all this as a temp, right? With the real orchestra and get the 5.1s, because you couldn't get 5.1s back then in the digital performers.
I don't think with Navras in particular, I think Don hadn't, essentially there was that other track that we took the piano piece from, and also the vocals.
Oh no! I thought we took.
But I remember saying to Don, I'm going to have to lobotomize this, because it was very John Adams contemporary sort of thing. So it had to be made far more with a techno mentality to it.
Yes. I remember you coming to me and saying, the Wachowskis want me to do the end credit, and they want me to take one of Don's pieces and turn it into a techno piece of music for the end credits. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. And you're like, yes, and I need your help, and we're going to do this. I'm going to do it at a different BPM. So we showed up at the day when Don was recording that cue for the movie. It's the rain, the big fight, Agent Smith versus Neo, climactic fight there at Matrix 3. And then Don said, okay, we're going to do it again. Don was conducting, and he said, okay, we'll do it again at whatever BPM you had.
135.
And then I took those tracks, and then I was able to do so this was the first time that we were doing things where I was actually feeding you pre-recorded music that, like, as a stereo.
I think also we had to do things like we had to make the piano people play it the way we wanted it.
I think that was
really difficult, because there were 2 pianists on that session, and one of them just couldn't do it. I can't remember which one. They couldn't give it that. Yeah. They just couldn't give it that feel, and so we thought, okay, forget that. Let's do the other piano player, and the other piano player got it straight away. Mm-hmm. Yeah, banged it out. And I remember we had to alter quite a number of things in that session.
A lot. Yeah. Well, then what I was going to say is, what I did was, I remember we did a little test, and we knew that if I stayed in meters, metric meters as opposed to time or filled frames, my timeline was in measures. So what I would give you like 2 measures, and then you would put it into your digital performer, and that they lined up, and you could just you could just like start looping whatever I gave you, that would be just totally sunk up, right? And then that gave you your start. And I think one of the first ones was that piano riff. And then you started taking that. Of course, we had to really work it. Now, if the 2 minutes that they heard that a version of that and said, yeah, keep going, then I remember, because to fill up the areas, there was one thing, I don't remember how this came up. And Deepak, you might want to ask him, because it might have been Deepak that suggested it. And it was that chant section. When it slows down, just before the real slow section, there's a chant that comes in. And then I went back to Tower Records, and I found that chant. And then I brought it back, and I was able to, I bought like 3 or 4 CDs of it. And I remember I got the chant like by itself, and said like, Ben, what do you think of it? Like, yeah, but put it in the right key and, get it in the right. It's like, I did that. I put it in the right key, the right speed, gave it to you. And then that became that, but then we had to replace it. Remember that? Because
in fact, what happened was we got in that singer to do it. We got in one of his arms friend singers, and it sort of never sounded right. So I had to spend a day recording myself doing it. And yeah. And so I had to, and usually I don't.
Deepak on that too, maybe?
No, he didn't sing on that. He sang the Sanskrit chants. But I remember,
and he did the taka. Did he do the takas too? I think.
Well, those were like weird things, because I remember hearing, Deepak was just singing in the room, and I went, yeah, that sounds great. Why didn't we do that? And so he put that down, and I remember, and then him and Mabi, because like Deepak essentially started as a percussionist, and Deepak and Mabi were like just voicing a rhythm out, and I went, wow, that's amazing, let's chuck it in. So there were lots of these things that happened, weren't there, where if Mabi and Deepak hadn't have been improvising,
Mabi and Greg kind of overlaid some percussion, I believe, right? It's not just Mabi in there, is there?
Loads. Yeah. Greg was a savior on Matrix 2, because I remember we had that guy in who did, remember?
He came in with like and he brought in all this stuff, remember?
Well, he brought in a truck. Yeah, yes. I mean, he was like the LA percussionist, wasn't he? And he had like a transporter come in with all of his equipment, like flight cases of shakers, taiko drums, everything. And really all I wanted was Mabi. And I remember asking him to play congas, and he had like these Latin congas, which are like wooden, yeah? And he's got like secretary hands, and they're all gentle and all Latin hands, maybe, I suppose, might be a fairer way of saying it. And they just never sounded like Mabi. I think you were looking for a certain percussion.
You were looking for a certain feel, I think. And it just,
I knew Mabi so well, and I've been recording Mabi, and when Mabi hits the drum, it's, the earth shakes. And it really
he wasn't on to. He wasn't on to. He came in for 3.
Mabi didn't want to come out of Africa for some reason. I said, hey, Mabi, do you fancy coming over to LA and doing some recording? He said, like, oh no, man, I want to build my chicken hut or something like that. He built his house 3 times and they fell down 3 times because they never built foundations or something. He got ripped off and all of these things. Wow. But he said, no, man, I don't want to do it. I'm happy here at the moment. I'm chilled. I think we were very lucky to get Greg on too, because that guy with the Arctic lorries, the percussion, it just never felt right. So when Greg turned up with a bag, literally a bag of bongos and hand percussion, it just went straight away. It was amazing. But I think on 3, Greg and Mabi became that, didn't they? They were like brothers.
Yeah.
And they were like
all of us were, actually. It was, 2 was an interesting thing, because I loved the Paramore, where we did a lot of the recording and working on a lot more cues there, actually. But the chapel, Michael Kamen's spot was just so special in a way. I mean, it was a perfect area for all of us to sort of hang out. And like, you were mainly up in the main room at the board, and then we were sort of on call, it was like, you'd have an idea. And I remember we kept feeding you different things as your ideas came up and as the piece expanded, whatever. And I remember there was a moment there, that for about 3 days, maybe longer, you were pretty much by yourself, and you didn't want to be disturbed, and you were basically putting it all together. You had you had most of the transitions, you had most of the sections. We'd all recorded them. We were all there for them, but no one really knew, what it was all going to be like, really. And finally, after a few days, you called us in. All of us were there. It was a night. I mean, it was a summer night at that place. It was special. I'll remember this to the day I die. And you brought us all in, Greg, Azam, Mabi, Deepak. You played it back. You hit go, and we just all sat there for 9.5 minutes or whatever, listened to this thing. And afterward, I remember we just like, oh my God, we were hugging each other. Do you remember that? It was this great explosion of like, wow. I mean, I never felt like a part of something, you know what I mean? Like, being a part of a recording from the beginning stages right on up. And it was Navras, more than any of them. Cause like I said, all the other ones came together in different ways, a piece here, a piece there. And you would have like, oh, I got this old track I was working on, and I never really did, oh yeah, there's a piece maybe that we need over here. Let me see that thing. And I would cut it, you know what I mean? And show it to the Wachowskis. They go, yeah, go with that, I'd say, this is just the beginning, just what do you think? And then they go, yeah, we like it. Of course, they didn't have anything else. It was a strange thing, because just getting back, the one thing I want to add to before you came on, a decision was made somewhere, maybe after the trailer, that long trailer, somewhere along the line, a decision was made to bring in, and this is the way it was explained to me, a different techno producer, composer, for each scenes that we had in the second Matrix. They had, so the Burly Brawl was going to be Prodigy. You were the Freeway Chase. Fluke was Zion. They had all these areas, and what happened was people they didn't show up. They didn't they were delivering stuff, but nowhere near the kind of material that I needed. And meanwhile, Don was writing all stuff for all these scenes, like just in case nothing, I suppose nothing, if there was no techno there, he was ready with orchestra stuff. And that's when I would start to bring your stuff in, because you were there and we were working it. We had an act. They didn't like it. I don't think that could have been part of the Matrix. They, I think a lot, not the Wachowskis didn't like it. They loved it. We were giving them answers. We were giving them solutions. But who didn't like it was, I think, just the record people, because it was becoming Juno. Remember? Do you remember that? It was like too much Juno. How can we solve this record? It's like,
well, I remember having that day where we were in the Paramore, and I went to the studio section of the Paramore where we were recording, and Dana said, "Oh no, you've been locked out. Warner Brothers have locked you out.
wow.
They're not paying for the sessions anymore."
Oh,
And so I got on the phone immediately to I can't remember, someone at the Wachowskis' office, and said, "This has happened." And immediately I got a phone call from Joe Silver going, "Don't worry, Ben, you'll be back in there in a minute." And I think it's sort of like he had jumped on a conference call with Jason Bentley, and sort of decided to castrate him verbally on the phone with a bunch of other people, and the doors were unlocked. But there was quite a big anti-Juno for Warner Brothers, which, I mean, Jason Bentley was doing his job, which was just to secure Warner Brothers artists for those scenes. And if it had been any other film, I would have been out the door. But luckily for me, it was, and for us really, that it stayed on course. But I remember things like the Burly Brawl were, you look at the Burly Brawl and why the Prodigy one. I remember reading like the Prodigy really pissed off about the fact that their track wasn't used, but it was the wrong BPM.
No, I remember the track. It amounted to about 6 different measures. It sounded good, but it wasn't very developed. It was like a minute and a half for an 8-minute fight scene. It was like, yeah, okay, Don took 3 or 4 minutes of it, but still 5 minutes or whatever it had to be. I don't remember what the Burly Brawl was, but somewhere around 5 minutes and with 6 measures, you can't do it. So I would try. I mean, you don't know this, but while you were working in the Paramore, sometimes I'd have to be at the editing, facility where I had another Pro Tool set up, I think. And I would have to cut in all these tracks that Jason was giving me for Burly Brawl or whatever, all these different, his people or whatever that he was bringing in. And nothing was working. Then the Wachowskis would come in and go, nope, we don't like it. It's not right. And I'd say, sorry. And then the one thing I hated, Jason was even giving me stuff that he had given me before. And I said, look, you don't know these guys, Jason, like I know them. You can't pull the wool over their eyes. I'm not going to show them. This might have pissed off the Warner Brothers people too, because I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but I told Jason, I said, I'm not going to show the Wachowskis something I've already showed them. And they said no to. I'm not going to do it. Just cut it a little differently. I go, no, it's not that. It's like, they don't like that music. They don't want that beat, period. It's like, and so there were times I just said, no, give me something else, anything else. But, I'll try anything, but not that, not something that they've already refused. I'm not going to do that. I mean, look, this is a long time ago. It's hard to remember a lot of the stuff, but a few things stick out. And I'll tell you, I remember definitely that moment when you played Navras for the first time. It was almost like seeing the Matrix for the first time. When I saw the first, reel of the Matrix and going like, wow. The first time I saw the mirror scene, when he takes the pill, after he takes the pill, oh my God, he goes down that chute and the whole bit and wakes up in the pod. And I was like, right? Even though that was heavily green screen, that was not filled in.
I can't actually remember that thing in Encino. I just remember it being it sounds like it's the most complicated track I've ever been involved in, but I do all of the tracks that I write, generally, I'll go back and I'll rework and I'll go, no, that's a piece of shit, and change it again, or I'll end up with 2 bars or something and start all over again. And that's possibly about the only track that's ever been, it was just very kinetic. Every bit just went. It worked. No one gave me anything that was shit. Like a shit recording, like when Lakshmi Shankar came in to record her voice. It was like we did one take and it was like, wow, that's done.
Yeah, she was amazing.
So
and that's another moment I remember. Deepak, when she came in, Deepak kneeled down and kissed her feet. I'll never forget that. He showed that kind of respect to that woman when she came in. I was like, wow.
I think he apologized for using 2 rags as well.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of thing.
Is that what did?
Yeah, I think in like the flute section, I remember we recorded the flutes in the down section, and we had Lakshmi Shankar by this time, and all of that was working. And I kept on thinking, why isn't this working? So I put in the 2 flutes, both takes, and it suddenly started to work.
Well, he kind of answers her, doesn't he? On flute, but she does something, like a little melisma thing, and then he answers her. I just listened to the track again before we started the session, just to kind of remind myself. Like,
what's it sound like?
I remember I gave you a lot of those orchestras, those choir swells. I did like reverse things, and like I gave you a whole bunch of them, and I remember I was surprised that you like, wow, right off the bat you used that one right in the beginning. I was like, right on, man. I
remember that you also, like when we got into the mixing, we had the pianos, but it didn't really sound right.
I think there's doubling. I'm hearing strings in there, right? There's some doubling.
You did that. You did that because I think we were listening to the piano and we thought it doesn't quite sound right. And you went, hang on a minute. You sort of went over to your computer and chopped out the cellos doing it. And then you then put in those cellos.
And then there's also some, I think some pits in there and stuff, accents that, you hear them sometimes separate. And that one's like, dong, dong, dong.
I think what was really good about it was when the Wachowskis went in and listened to it at, was it O'Henry's or some other place?
I remember bringing it the first time. I remember at least the completed, when we finally finished the 9-minute piece, because they eventually gave you a time when they knew how long the credit. They didn't do it, and you're right about the beginning. Your story might very well be the correct one of constantly adding, because oftentimes they'll start with like a 2-minute thing for the main credits of one kind of music, and then they go into the a little medley or something. And by this time they had given you the timing, and you were also instructed to fill it up completely, right? And I do remember, and it was in Warner Brothers. We had already done maybe it was a temp mix. We hadn't done the 5.1 mix. I don't remember what we brought them, what version, but it was the final mix. And I remember them in that room with Joey Rand's room. And I remember them going, yes, this is, and you were like, it's got every, all the ethnicities. They're like, yeah.
Well, that's what they really wanted, wasn't it? They wanted some sort of track to sum up the whole Matrix trilogy. And I think luckily for us that it really worked. And
then it pleased me to no end, of course, at the premiere of the third one, for the red carpet, that was the soundtrack. Navras was the soundtrack, completely out of loop. So I was like, and it fit. It just fit. It felt like the Matrix premiere.
It's one of those things that just happens, I think, in the universe where magical things happen. And that was just one of them. In fact, that's supposed to be one of the biggest ones that's ever happened to me, where everything has been in alignment. All the people you're working with bring in the best that they can do. And it was just stunning.
Yeah.
So that's go back to the idea of the credit, that me and Don get the credit for it, but really it's everyone that was involved in creating that really deserved the credit.
Yeah, but you were the ringleader. I used to watch you and observe how you would work and get things out of musicians that I've not seen a lot of people do. A good conductor will do it. I've seen it on a scoring stage with an orchestra, but you were doing it with individuals, and just taking take after take after take. And then you would, somehow I think remembering the bits, or maybe you went back and listened to them all. I don't know how you worked. I wasn't there every minute of the time when you were working, but I was amazed how you worked with the musicians, how you gave direction, how you were able to get idea and actually improvise. A lot of it was, oh, you can do that. Oh, what if you do this and this and this then? That kind of stuff. It was like, wow.
They were great nights, though, weren't they? Encino and just chilling out, and
much better than the second one, because that second one was just because we had so many things going with the game, and there were so many variables in that second one that it was the third one in contrast.
What was lovely about that track, for me, Lana was saying, it's going to be a massive hit all over the world. What I did love was that, I'd get videotapes from India of little girls dancing to it, or I'd get fire dancers from Finland or Russia. And it spread around the world in a very underground sort of way. And it had an effect there.
Perfect. How Matrix of it. It's perfect metaphor, right?
I think it was a really fantastic thing that just moved around the planet. Let me just wrap it up, this one, by saying thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
So it would be great to go back maybe some more on some of the other cues that we were doing and what it felt like, and some stories back from the past. I think people might enjoy them. See you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks to Zig for coming along to Inside the Juno Reactor. Thanks also to Maro at Kenji Productions for producing these shows. If you want to follow the podcast, do hit the subscribe and hopefully visit us again inside the Juno Reactor.